Well, there is a term and a book out there that has shaken things up, and what an honor to have this next guest with us today, Edward Klein. He's a well-known writer and editor with a distinguished career in American journalism. Edward is a former foreign editor for Newsweek and former editor-in-chief of the New York Times Magazine, New York Times best-selling author, and he's authored a book called The Amateur, or Amateur. And this term was also used by Bill Clinton, the amateur. Bill Clinton used that term to describe President Obama. Edward, I tell you, you use a term in your book. By the way, thank you for being with us today. I value your time. But you used a term in your book I think is the simplest term that describes the problem we have with this administration, and that is, you say, he is in over his head.
Absolutely, and we should have known that from the beginning in 2008 when he ran for president, but as we now know, he was not properly vetted by the mainstream media, and in fact, quite the opposite. The mainstream media fell deeply in love with him. They seem to have been hypnotized by him. He was the one, the Black Jesus, the fellow who was going to save us from ourselves. No one looking into his past to see, in fact, that he had never run anything, accomplished anything, or had the credentials to be president of the United States.
Well, I guess, you know, it provokes the question, how in the world did we do this? But the fact of the matter is we did do this, and people are now beginning to realize that we actually have a kid running a country, and it's embarrassing to say the least. Even his predecessor, Bill Clinton, called him an amateur. Is that a damaging thing for him to say?
I think it was very damaging. Of course, Bill Clinton, when he said it to a group of friends, and I had two sources in that room who talked to me later about it. Clinton didn't intend it to become public, but in fact, there's no love lost between these two men, Clinton and Obama. In fact, I think of them as the Hatfields and McCoys of the Democratic Party.
So why isn't Hillary saving this presidency? Why isn't she kind of getting in his ear and say, hey, look?
Well, I think she has her eyes on 2016. And I think in their heart of hearts, the Clintons actually don't want to see Obama reelected, because if he is, we'll have 8 years, not just 4 years, but 8 years of an amateur running the White House. And at that point, the American public hopefully will be fed up with the Democrats and throw out the Democrats, and Hillary will have a hard time getting elected president in 2016. So I think they're very ambivalent, to put it mildly, about this amateur whom we have in the White House.
So what has this done to us, Edward? I mean, given the time, from the time you wrote the book and published it until where we are today, even in this last week, we got some really damaging things with this president that certainly indicates that he is in over his head. We're damaged internally with all of our debt. We're damaged on the Foreign Relations Department area. I mean, it's a mess. He's got his own former pastor damaging him. I mean, can this person get reelected?
Well, I think he could, yes. I think that's why I wrote The Amateur, because I wanted to sound a clear message, and send, I should say, a clear message to the American people through shows such as yours, because it doesn't get through the mainstream media. But your audience should know that we have a president who is temperamentally, psychologically, personality-wise unsuited for the job, unlike, say, a Lyndon Johnson, who didn't give good speeches or read well from the teleprompter, but knew how to manipulate the levers of power in Washington. This guy, Obama, knows how to give a good speech, from time to time anyway, but he is at a loss how to deal with fellow politicians in Washington in order to come together and get things done. He has been signally unsuccessful in bridging this partisanship that he said he was going to do.
Most presidents mature in office. It seems like he just got worse in office. I mean, he got exposed in office.
I agree. John Kennedy was a perfect example of someone who came into the presidency really unprepared. He was a senator, but he hadn't been a very serious senator. He was more of a playboy type. But during his 3 years in office before he was assassinated, by everybody's account, he did grow in office. He did learn. He did develop. We see 3.5 years into Barack Obama's presidency, he meets with Vladimir Putin in Mexico just recently, and Putin eats him for lunch. And afterward, Obama is asked at a press conference, how did things go? And he hems and he haws and he says, oh, I think we're going to get the Russians to come along on Syria. The Russians are not going to come along on Syria. The Russians see him for what he is, which is a weak president. And they are going to take advantage of that. And that's going to be true of all our adversaries in Syria, in Iran, China. Seeing that they have the edge over this guy, we are in trouble.
No question about it. It's been said that he is a sock puppet, but who is the hand inside that puppet? Who are the fingers really giving him this advice and letting him go down this road?
I think that it would be a mistake to think that he's being completely manipulated. I think he is, in his heart of hearts, a far left guy. He believes in redistributing wealth. He believes that he should engineer outcomes in our economy and who wins, who loses. But if you're looking for people who are of I'm not going to answer that phone call. And if you're looking for people who are like-minded and are urging him on in that direction, you have to look at his wife, Michelle, who is at least as left-wing as he is and has a very important influence on him, and even more so, their chief political advisor, Valerie Jarrett, who's in the White House. Hardly anybody knows who she is. Hardly anybody's heard her name, but she is the chief political advisor to both the First Lady and to the President, and has untold power and has given him terrible advice over the last 3.5 years on Solyndra, on she even was opposed to his going after Osama bin Laden with the Navy SEALs. This is the one time he didn't listen to her and did it right.
So what's the I'm going to jump around here a little bit. What's the problem with the Obamas and Oprah and the Kennedys?
Well, as you know, in my book, The Amateur, I talk a lot about his ingratitude toward people who were very pivotal in his getting into the White House. And the perfect examples of this ingratitude are the stories I tell in The Amateur about the treatment that has been meted out to Oprah Winfrey and to Caroline Kennedy, both of whom have been frozen out of the White House by Michelle and Valerie Jarrett because they don't want conflicting advice given by powerful figures to the president. So Oprah offered, for instance, to do an Oprah Winfrey show when she still had her syndicated show, to launch Michelle Obama's anti-obesity campaign. But Michelle Obama held a meeting in the East Wing of the White House, where the First Lady traditionally has her office, and was heard to say, this comes from people who were at the meeting, I don't want some rich, fat woman being the emblem of my campaign. Oprah heard about that. That got back to her. She was furious. And as we know, she is not campaigning in 2012 for Barack Obama.
Just fast forward a little bit, Edward. Do you think that the Jeremiah Wright revealings will continue to be a problem for him in this re-election campaign?
Well, as you know, I sat down for 3 hours with Obama's pastor, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, with a tape recorder going. And I tape recorded our conversation, released the tape to the press, in which he says that he was offered a $150,000 bribe by Barack Obama's best friend, Eric Whitaker. This has not been picked up by the mainstream media. And the Reverend Wright himself has remained silent. I think after the election campaign, he will do his autobiography and unload on Barack Obama, whom he is very bitter about because Obama threw him under the bus.
Wow.
But as we know, the Reverend Wright's charges about this bribe should have been made into a major story.
Yes.
And it hasn't been. It's only in shows like yours that we can discuss this, because ABC, NBC, and CBS, for instance, have totally blanked this out. They don't want to deal with it. This is not something I personally, am reporting. This is from the mouth of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who also said, by the way, very important, that he did not know whether he actually converted Barack Obama, excuse me, from Islam to Christianity. When I asked him that question, he said, that's hard to say. He also said that Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are not church-going people. That church is not important to them. These are not my words. These are the Reverend Wright's words. This is a pastor, a Protestant pastor saying this. This is very important material,
yes.
Yet it's ignored, and thank goodness that we have the opportunity, you and I, to discuss this.
I'm going to have you back because I'm almost out of time, but in closing question, because this is powerful, we're talking to Edward Klein. He's authored the book, The Amateur, and let me encourage you to get a copy of this. It's just amazing. He documents a lot of the things that we're talking about here in the book called The Amateur. By the way, you can Google it, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and get a copy of it. In about the minute and a half that I have left, Edward, just fast forwarding a little bit, you probably have been watching the mess now with Eric Holder and Fast and Furious. Do you think this is Obama's Watergate?
I think it could very well be, but it might be too late for the election. This kind of clash between Congress and the executive can be drawn out for a very long period of time. And I think one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons that Obama has used executive privilege at this point is to draw this thing out to pass the election in November.
Right, right.
Eventually, the truth is going to come out. It always does,
right.
Especially when there's a cover-up, and I do think there is a cover-up.
Edward, we're going to do part two. I'm going to have my producer get back to you. This is fascinating, and I would love to do this because I think you're doing, quite frankly, the country a service by doing this and getting it out. And I hope your book gets tremendous exposure. So we'll get you back, okay?
Thanks so much. It's been wonderful being with you.